Good morning, eights. Mr. Westra here. Um, so, this is Half Brother number 25, part number 1. So, just to give you a recap of where we've been, the last time we read, we found out that Project Zan was being officially shut down by the university in British Columbia, and that Zan had been sold to University in Nevada. And Ben and his family were taking Zan down to Nevada to the ranch, to the chimp colony in which Zan is going to be left. They arrived there. They met the Helson family, who's going to be taking care of Zan. And we left off with Ben in the chimp house. Zan was inside the cage without any clothes, without his diaper. He was in the cage, and Ben slept outside the cage for the night. So that's where we pick it up. So here we go. Chapter 20. I was woken by the sound of the big chimps hooting and shrieking, and a voice saying, "Rise and shine, mate!" I squinted up from my sleeping bag to see a big guy uncoiling a long hose down the walkway. Time to clean the cages," he said. He sounded Australian. "I'm Marcus. You must be Ben, right?" The other chimps seemed to know what to do. They moved through the tunnels and other cages, while Marcus hosed down the floors, washing yesterday's food and urine and feces down the drains. Light poured through the high barred windows, and Zan looked around properly for the first time. He stared and stared at the other chimps. I wondered what he was thinking. He'd never seen another chimp before in his life, except for pictures of himself. But those pictures were always beside photos of me and Mum and Dad and Peter. He was one of us, not one of them. Finally, he turned to me and signed, "Black Dogs." Not far from our house in Victoria, there was a huge black Rottweiler, and that was pretty much the biggest animal Zan had ever seen before now. I didn't know how to tell him he was the same, or even if I should. Maybe it was better he figured it out in his own time. Marcus saved our cage till last, and I quickly pulled Zan's blanket and toy through the bars and urged him to one side so Marcus could hose down his floor. There wasn't much to clean up. Zan was pretty interested in watching the water swirl down the drain. Then he walked over to the water and had a pee, hooting with delight. I couldn't help laughing. I was just glad he was happy. I still wasn't used to seeing him naked, though. He looked so small and young compared to the others, and he already looked less like one of us. Once Marcus was done, another person came to help feed the chimps their breakfast. While all this was going on, Peter arrived with Mum and Dad. They'd brought me an Egg McMuffin and an orange juice from McDonald's. "How was your night?" Mum asked, hugging me. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. "It was okay," I said. "He woke up and stayed up a long time, but he didn't seem too scared. He calls the other chimps black dogs." "Ha!" said Dad. "The power of cross-fostering." Soon after, Dr. Helson and his wife arrived. I guess their kids had gone off to school. When they unlocked Zan's cage and I went inside, he was so excited he nearly strangled me, hugging and kissing me. Dr. Helson watched us with a rueful smile. Mrs. Helson wanted to examine Zan, but it took a while to get him off me. She had an excellent, reassuring manner with him, and he let her poke and prod him. "He's a very healthy little chimp," she announced. "That's good," said Helson. "In a chimp colony, the weak can be victimized. The faster we can integrate him, the better chance he has of being accepted. We'll introduce him to Sheba later today. She lost her own baby 4 months ago." "What happened?" Mum asked. "One of the other males bit off its face," said Helson matter-of-factly. I looked over at him in horror. "A mother typically takes care of a chimp for at least 5 years," Mrs. Helson explained. "It's a big time investment for her, and she won't have any other babies during that time. We'd bred her with Maxwell because they seemed like natural mates." "Zeus got jealous," Helson went on, looking at my mother. "He thought if he took the baby out of the equation, he'd have a chance of mating with Sheba and producing his own offspring. Not that they always know who the father is anyway. A female in estrus tends to be quite generous. She'll mate with many males." I wished I hadn't eaten breakfast. The aftertaste in my mouth was making my stomach churn. "Will Zan be safe with Sheba?" I wanted to know. "I mean, that other baby." "The other baby was very small, quite defenseless," said Helson. "Zan's much bigger. I suspect it'll be an altogether different proposition. Here's Sheba." He pointed a couple of cages over. Sheba was tall and rangy, chewing happily on a big piece of the chimp loaf and a head of lettuce. "It'll be very interesting to see if her maternal instincts kick in with Zan," said Dr. Helson. The way he said it, "very interesting to see," made it sound like another experiment, and one that might not turn out very well. She was gentle, Peter said to me, and Maxwell too. He nodded at an even bigger chimp that was in the cage with Sheba. "He's a sweetheart, very patient and nurturing too. But not strong enough to save his baby," I said. "We introduced Zeus too early," said Dr. Helson. "That was a miscalculation. And these are our boys," said Mrs. Helson affectionately as we walked to the next cage. They still looked pretty big to me, at least 2 or 3 times Zan's size. "They've lost their tail tufts," I noted, "so that makes them at least 5? "Very good," said Mrs. Helson, giving me a smile. "Igor is 6 and Caliban is 7. "I'll be working with these 2 on signing," Peter said, "and I'm pretty sure Zan will play a big part in teaching them." I'd already known that Peter would be working with the other chimps too, but it still gave me a pang that he wouldn't just be taking care of Zan. A couple of the other chimpers, Sven and Patricia, came in to take Igor and Caliban out for their morning walks. In their hands they held neck collars and long chain-link leashes. "Take them to the south paddock today," Helson instructed them. "We'll let Zan have the east field to himself, just for now." "Thank you," said Mum. I was watching as Sven and Patricia went into the cage and attached the metal collars to the chimps. Igor and Caliban seemed used to it and barely protested. It made them look like giant, oversized dogs. But to me, mostly they seemed like prisoners. Helson ushered us out of the way as they headed from the building. From a rack on the wall, each chimper had a long pole. "What are those?" I asked. "Cattle prods," said Helson. "Everyone carries one when they're working with the chimps. Safety policy." I looked at Peter. Something else he hadn't told us. "Zan doesn't need a cattle prod," I said, "or a collar." Helson said, "Don't underestimate his strength. And remember, my fellows are a lot older and a lot stronger. Zeus here is 175 pounds and 7 times stronger than me." So this was Zeus, the one that had bitten off the baby's face. Sitting, eating, he didn't seem so monstrous. But I guess I must have gotten too close to his cage, because he suddenly leapt up, all shoulders and arms, and jaws wide and fierce. He ran on 2 legs to the bars, shrieking. I jumped back, my heart beating so fast and hard, I worried I'd fainted. But Mum stepped back too. Helson and his wife, I noticed, held their ground, as did Dad and Peter. Watching me, Zeus filled his mouth with water from the spigot near the floor. "Look out," Helson said. Too late. Zeus sprayed the water, drenching me. "He's asserting his dominance," Helson explained. He took a straggly towel from a hook on the wall and tossed it at me. "You're small, and you looked scared, so he knew he could get away with it. You'd never try anything like that with me, would you, Zeus, old boy?" Helson stood very close to the cage, close enough that Zeus could easily have reached through and grabbed him. But Zeus did nothing, just dropped to all fours and shambled back to his food. I patted myself dry with the towel. "At least he didn't share a cage with anyone else," I said with relief. Mrs. Helson seemed surprised. "Oh no, he's quite sociable. He's our alpha male. But he feeds alone. The others know there's no point in being near him at feeding time, unless they want to get smacked and wait for his seconds." Peter, Mum, and I took Zan out to the east field to play. Dad had things he wanted to discuss with Dr. Helson. When I saw Peter putting the collar on Zan, I started to object, but he glanced at me and shook his head. And I knew, in that moment, that Zan was no longer mine. Not that he ever belonged to me, not like a cat or a dog, but now Peter was about to take over as the most important person in his life. In some ways, he had been for months. No one spent more of his waking hours with Zan. Once we were inside the fenced field, Peter took off the collar and we played with Zan. He loved all the space and the trees and the fallen branches and the little pond that Helson kept stocked with fish. In some ways, it was better than what we had in our backyard, and I began to wonder if he'd be happier here. Dad joined us later with a picnic lunch, which we all ate on the grass together, with a big blanket spread out. My throat still felt like it had a fist clenched in it, but I ate some food, trying to smile and be cheerful for Zan. Afterwards, he didn't want to put his collar back on, and as we neared the chimp house, he held back, pulling against his lead. Peter let him come up into his arms, and we carried him into the building. Halson was waiting for us. As Peter took Zan back inside his cage, Zan started crying and very nearly climbed out of Peter's arms. But Peter laid out Zan's blanket and his G.I. Joe toy and got Zan interested in playing a game of hide-and-seek. He hid the toy at the far end of the cage, and as Zan scampered over to claim it, Peter crept out and locked the door. It was a dirty trick, and Peter knew it. He didn't look happy. I noticed that in the next cage, Sheba was sitting alone. Halson pulled a lever, and the gate between the two cages slid up. Then we waited. It was a long wait. First, they just ignored each other, and then, after about a half an hour, Sheba walked through the tunnel into Zan's cage. It was the first time I'd seen Zan so close to another chimp, and he looked so small and defenseless. When he saw Sheba enter the cage, he stood up on both legs and displayed. Chest thrown out, arms high, hands slapping at his chest, he shrieked and hooted. "Excellent," said Halson. I felt kind of proud of Zan's bravery, but scared too. I didn't want him provoking Sheba into a fight. Sheba didn't seem interested by Zan's antics. She sniffed around his cage and then caught sight of his blanket.